Hi, everyone. My name is Candice Thomas, and I am the owner of the Evergreen Wellness Studio right here in downtown Barrie. And today I have the privilege to interview and have a discussion with Rochelle Maurice. And Rochelle is a clinical and organizational ethicist based in Toronto, Ontario. Her work in ethics was strongly influenced by her professional background in social work, the most significant of which was in the neonatal intensive care unit and pediatrics department in a community hospital in Toronto. As a result of her experiences in both social work and ethics, Rochelle has an interest in and passion for addressing issues that affect pregnant and postpartum women and non-binary people at the intersection of health and social care. She is currently pursuing doctoral studies in social work that focuses on equality and maternal child care. Welcome, Rochelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
That bio, woohoo! Incredible work you're doing.
Thank you.
Incredible
Thank you.
work.
I think the one thing that I didn't add in that bio, and I feel so honored to be a part of, is that I'm a member of the board of directors for the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative, so CPMHC, which really is a wonderful opportunity to become really engaged and immersed in this work. And they do absolutely wonderful things.
Yes. And I too, that's kind of how I found you. I'm their social media ambassador. And when I asked, do you know anyone that would love to come on and I could interview and discuss this topic with, you were the first name that they came up with.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So I'm honored to sit and discuss these topics with you. I know that we talked about them a little bit before, so I'm sure the discussion is just going to flow. But today's topic is maternal mental health with specifics related to the BIPOC community.
Yeah.
So my first question to you for viewers kind of tuning in, and let's set the groundwork for anyone tuning in. What exactly is perinatal mental health?
Really good question. So when we think about mental health, we think about the full, just broadly, we think about the full spectrum from, a place of wellness and well-being to a place where there are maybe concerns or struggles with respect to mental health. And so perinatal mental health, to be all-encompassing, would include the period during pregnancy and afterwards as well, so into the postpartum period. And it could be as long as sort of months to years after the delivery of the child.
Yes. And just thinking about that, when previous to having children, I always heard pre and postnatal, and it always felt like that only encompassed like your third trimester. And then once baby was here, that was that. So I love how this kind of spans more way before and way after, and we're taking care of women and babies well before and well after.
Absolutely. And so I think now we're starting to hear more discourses around the fourth trimester and trying to treat sort of at least that early postpartum period with the same kind of intensity and support as, let's say, the third trimester, for example, when you're getting really close to your due date and there's lots of people rallying around you, making sure that you're okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I always think the fourth trimester, calling it that, is key, because a lot of the time it's very much about baby. And then after, it's nice to know that mothers specifically get care just for them.
Absolutely. And to expand a little bit further on your question about what exactly is perinatal mental health. So I kind of try to think about it as I described in terms of the full spectrum. Oftentimes we hear a lot about baby blues and postpartum depression, and it's much more than that. And so before I start into tumble down that rabbit hole, I should offer full disclosure. I am not a mom myself. I am not a parenting person, but I'm coming to this with my experience, my work experience, the things that I'm interested in and starting to explore in my doctoral studies, and just a general interest in how this goes for for all people, including the BIPOC community. And we'll tumble down that rabbit hole a little bit more. So when I think about baby blues, and I remember as a social worker in the NICU trying to do some kind of education with parents around this, I would say, you know, your body's going through all of these changes,
Yes.
hormones and everything to do what exactly it's supposed
Yeah.
to do, to
Yeah.
produce milk and, you know, all of those things. And so there's a lot going on top of the fact that you just delivered a baby, as well as all of the changes that come along with sleep, changes in sleep cycle, changes with, you know, eating patterns and habits and all the rest of that. And so what I used to tell them is you may feel teary, you may be sad, there may be moodiness, irritability, and worrying. But if you have a good nap and a good shower and you feel like a brand new person,
boom, boom, boom. That first shower when you get home from the hospital is key. You literally feel like everything that just happened to you just got, whew. And like that first time you get home and you're in your own clothes, you're in your own bed. It's mentally, it's a must.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's like, you know, you wake up and you feel like you're a new person and you have a shower and you're like, okay, I've got this again. That's what we tell people that the baby blues are, right? And then we get into conversations around, and I'll talk specifically about postpartum depression and then sort of expand it more into the perinatal mood disorders. And so when we talk about postpartum depression, we get more into the nap doesn't change anything. The shower doesn't change anything, right? There's a loss of pleasure or a lack of interest. There's low energy or persistent fatigue. You know, crying is one of those things that, you know, sort of straddle the fence on both sides of, you know, baby blues and postpartum depression. But if there's feelings of like guilt or worthlessness, intense changes to sleep or appetite, too much or too little is what we talk about, intense anxiety or agitation, just to name a few things, that's when we get into the realm of thinking about postpartum depression. But then what's talked about far less is things like postpartum anxiety. And so when we get into those kinds of things, we start to worry and think about, you know, instances of hypomania and mania, which are hard to recognize in the postpartum period because you're thinking that you're just getting everything done. It looks like you're just perhaps being ultra productive, but not really being able to recognize what is needed and what your body needs to be well, or maybe that your body is telling you that you can do well off of this much sleep and we're getting into perhaps dangerous territory.
I feel like you're describing myself.
Yeah, tell me.
Yes.
If you want to share.
Yes, I have two little girls. One is 5.5 and one is 1.5. And I went through postpartum with both. Ada was born in July of 2020. So everyone's world kind of changed then. So I felt a lot of anxiety and depression and isolation before she was even here, because that's when everything went into lockdown. So I felt like all of the feelings I felt after giving birth, I felt much, much sooner. And then with Olivia, I felt like the same thing. That shower was amazing. And after a while, I would go in the shower to hide or cry and nothing would change. I just needed a change of scenery, and the shower is the only place I felt I could go. I felt like I couldn't leave the house. And if I did, where would I go? It's just kind of, so, and you touched on so many great symptoms and how people kind of, it is a spectrum and how we kind of pinpoint where you are on the spectrum. How is it diagnosed? Like, how are we diagnosed on the spectrum? Can you elaborate on that a little bit? So in terms of my experience in general, it was you have postpartum depression, goodbye. And
Oh gosh.
right. So it's very much blanketed as this one thing. And you and I both know there's many, many things on the scale where some people might have mild symptoms or severe symptoms. How is it diagnosed? Where does that happen and how does that happen?
That's a really, really, really good question. Okay, so I'm going to try my best to answer it to the best of my understanding and abilities. I think it's like typically when it's diagnosed by a physician. Sometimes I think depending on who the physician is that you go to see first. So it could be like a family doctor, could be a pediatrician, because, you know, linking the connections to the child's well-being, to the parents'
Absolutely.
well-being, that puts them on the hook as well. Could be like an obstetrician as well. And depending on their knowledge, capacity, understanding, and expertise, it could be there may be a facilitation of a referral to a psychiatrist. And so when we think about diagnosis, I imagine that whether there are tools or a series of questions to ask to figure out along the lines of the symptoms that we kind of just talked about, right?
Yes.
Which, and I'll digress here for a little bit, which sometimes is a little bit hard. It requires a lot of insight, reflection, and introspection. You have to be able to quantify the things that you have been feeling in a particular way. Loss of pleasure and lack of interest. What does that mean?
Exactly. I was going to ask
Right?
you. I was going to ask you.
But it really, like, it's this, like, I think it's this way of categorizing particular feelings. So if I think about, well, loss of pleasure and lack of interest, the question that would trigger that would be, so tell me the things that you enjoyed doing before.
Ooh.
Tell me the thing, like, have you had an opportunity to engage in those things? What made you smile? What brought you joy? What
Wow.
brought levity? And have you done those things recently? How have they made you feel?
Wow.
Right? So that's when you're getting into the concrete of and having people sort of facilitating this reflective activity to be able to say, well, that sounds like a loss of pleasure, or a lack of interest.
Yes.
Right?
Wow. I don't think I've ever been asked anything like that, ever. Like, what brings you joy and what it is that brought you joy? Do you do those things now? And just, I can say right away that both times and even now, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I didn't do any of those things. I felt like getting out of bed was my mission. And once I was out of bed, I'm done for the day.
Well, and the reality of the situation is that, like, your life changes, right?
Yes.
When you have kids. And so it really depends on the things that brought you joy, and the things that brought you joy in the past may be markedly different from the things that bring you joy now, right? But I think the ability to recognize that, like, those things used to make me happy, and I can't get to those things now, but I do find myself happy or content when I do these other things. And that's an answer to that question.
Yes. And I love that you said that it's just even the ability to recognize it.
Yeah.
Because being in it, but then being in it and knowing, like, okay, I'm in this. How can I step out a little bit and reflect back and say, my life has changed a little bit, but how can I find the joys in how my life is now? I think would be, and that all begins with being able to recognize it. It's just, I love this conversation. I love talking to you about this. Can you, I would say every time I reach out to someone, even, and I'm sure just even speaking to you, you don't have children, but I know you can rhyme off the top of your head how many people you know that have struggled with postpartum depression. It's not just if it happens to you, it's a you thing. If it happens to me, it's almost like it just ripples right through friends, family, everybody's affected in some way. What percentage of women struggle with postpartum depression? Because to me, it feels like it's big. it's there. And then of course there are some, you and I both know there's some women that don't even share it. So those percentages, it might be higher. What do you think?
Yeah, completely agree. So I found some statistics on this recently, and this is data going back, it's a little bit old now, but to 2018, 2019.
Okay.
So what they quantified as recent mothers under the age of 25 reporting feelings that are consistent with postpartum depression or an anxiety disorder, it's about 30%. And that's birthing and parenting people under the age of 25. Those that were 25 and over, it was about 23%.
Interesting.
And yeah, absolutely. And so, and I'll couple this with this other statistic around, recent mothers who reporting feelings consistent with postpartum depression or an anxiety disorder, who said that they have received treatment for their emotions or mental health since birth, was about 32%. And so that requires, and I take a step back, and I feel like that requires a lot, right? To get to the point where you're A, reporting this experience, and B, seeking treatment. Because we talked about having the insight into knowing and qualifying and quantifying all of these descriptions of postpartum depression or postpartum mood disorder that we described. So insight is like one part of it. And if you don't necessarily have the insight, you're not even getting to the next step, right?
Yes.
And then the next step would be being able to say, okay, something's wrong here. Where do I go? How do I figure out to fix or to address what is wrong here? And I think that perhaps is a stop for a lot of people.
Now, I'm going to quickly say in there, when you get to that point of, I've now recognized, I've acknowledged, and I'm at that point where I'm going to seek treatment, can you touch on, is there adequate treatment? Is there adequate resources? And if so, or there is a lack of, how do we even find them?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much wrapped up in that question.
So much wrapped up in that. I asked because when I got pregnant with Olivia, my first doctor's appointment, I got this file that was like this, all the things you have to do, exercise, eat, what you shouldn't eat, how you should sleep, and then what classes I could go to, all before, but it all focused on what I need to do to make baby well, not what I need to do to make me well. And then they handed my husband this 2-page pamphlet that was like, you're going to be a dad. Yay. I felt like, so to even go back and touch on your point where if I acknowledge and I become aware of these things that I'm feeling, that's a great step. It's a very hard step. But if I can't, how come the people around me aren't in the same knowing to recognize this person is unaware of these feelings? And how can I help them? I felt like they did my husband a disservice by making it sound like this is my responsibility and he is just there. So from the beginning, I felt like if they had just supported us in the same way, if I was a lucky one and I was well aware because I had struggled with anxiety and depression for most of my life. I was aware of these feelings in a certain way. And I felt like he was a bit lost. And not only did I have to say, I'm feeling this way, but this is what I need from you. It felt like, you just keep adding the things. And it just feels like, okay, I'm overwhelmed with all the things. I'm sorry that I just ran on with all of that, but just getting to that point of, okay, I'm aware, or someone has helped me become aware. Now I'm going to seek treatment. Is there adequate resources?
Tumble down a rabbit hole with me, if you will.
There.
Okay, so the first thing that like I can't get out of my mind, I had to make a note to remember to come back to the original question, was around feeling like this is a you thing. You are responsible not only for yourself, but yourself being well for baby, right? This is the dyad that's wrapped up in it. And that's I'm going to say, and this may be controversial, that's a lot of responsibility. Here's why. It gets at the very thing that you said next, which is, I don't feel like my husband was engaged in all of that. Like I was the one holding it. And it, like, there's nobody else outside that builds that community, that helps to say, you know, this is, we're all looking out for each other here. The other reason why I feel compelled to say that that's a lot of responsibility is that I feel like parenting is such a gendered thing. And in thinking about, and I've been fortunate enough to sort of learn this and try to do a tracing of the good mother in my recent studies, and like what all is wrapped up in that. And I will tell you, it is wild how things came to be centuries ago, about placing the responsibility solely at the feet of the mother, to say the health and well-being of future generations of this country, of this nation, of, you know, this place depends on, you know, the children that you produce. And we've figured out that the well-being of the child really depends on the well-being of the mother. You have to eat well, you have to do this, you have to sleep right, you have to exercise, you have to. But then also what that necessarily ties onto is this personal responsibility and accountability for the child. And so if you don't do all of these things in the name of the child, then that child runs the risk of being a poor contributing member to society, or, you know, costing systems a lot more. And I'm saying this not because I believe it, I don't believe it. I'm saying this from understanding some of the tracings. And then that's how the narrative about a bad mother comes about. You haven't done the thing to make your child the healthiest possible. You haven't done the thing to make your child ready for this world, ready to contribute, ready to play all these parts, emotionally strong, mental fortitude, because you haven't done these things upstream and you're not continuing to do them now. And I think family structures in the past where women stayed at home place that responsibility solely on their laps, right? And never mind all of the other things with a parent who is widowed.
Wow.
You know, like where there is job insecurity, in places where there are food insecurities, you know, where there are single parents, or your family structure never contemplated a two-parent household. And so you have to fulfill all of these things, these discourses that have been set and saved, and just, you know, sort of been this undercurrent in the fabric of our society for centuries. And I'm not saying that mothers shouldn't want to be that for their children. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are parenting people and mothers out there that this is important to them, and this is their work, and all the praise to you. It is challenging work.
Yes.
But what it does is it sets up a lot of people for failure in the way that you have just described. Yes. And so the lack of education that was afforded to your husband as a part of your family unit, as somebody that, what I'm hearing is supportive to you
Yes.
and your kids, to say, she may not see it, but you might see it.
Yes.
And also you might experience some of these things as well. So it takes a
Thank you.
lot of insight and support to these things. And now to tumble back very quickly to your question about access to resources, and I promise I'll stop talking.
Never.
There isn't a whole lot. There isn't a whole lot for fathers.
No.
There isn't a whole lot, and I say this cautiously, there isn't a whole lot for mothers. And when I say there isn't a whole lot, I mean timely access.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know we talked about this beforehand, and the only way I got help when I immediately needed help, it happened by accident. I was at an appointment for my daughter, my baby, and it was a well baby clinic. And the whole idea is they only treat babies, because her and I didn't have a doctor here. We just moved here. And so it was really specific to her. But she looked at me and she's like, there's something. She's like, are you okay? And that was it. I ended up on the floor of her office. I just needed someone to say it. So that meeting with her happened by accident. It wasn't even my appointment. And through that, I got access to our family health team here. But in that timely access, when I had to go for an interview to get help, because they needed to see that I was a risk to myself or a risk to my child. And if I was, then I could get help right away. If not, it was at least a year wait list. How? We don't have time to wait. We don't have time. And that all happened. I felt it's very reactive and not proactive. And we're losing mothers, and we're losing their health because of that. If I broke my arm today and someone said, listen, it's a 2-year wait list, I don't know, maybe go see someone else somewhere, I think it would be absurd. Someone would go to the ER and be like, this is absurd. How could this be? Like, same thing. If I was to deliver a baby, well, it's a 2-year wait list. It's a physical pain versus a mental pain. And we all say they're the same thing, but yet our society does not reflect that at all.
Yeah. Something that you touched on brought me back to, we talked about timely access, and you're right. The wait lists are incredible, but for those who can afford to go to, certain, or to receive certain kinds of specialized care, right? Yes. We're not even talking about people who are, have financial constraints, and whatever that looks like. And I'm not even getting into, people who are on social assistance or disability. I'm talking about the working poor, or I'm talking about people who, have good, stable, well-paying jobs, but because of the cost of food, housing, personal debt, all the rest of that, to make that pinch and to squeeze to be able to afford what they need.
Yes.
For all of this, that is a whole other factor altogether. And then the other bit that made me think as well, when we talk about safe access, and and this is not a universe of things. When I say safety, this is not by any means of the imagination a comprehensive list. But what I think about is safety as a person of color. Being able to find a space where somebody understands you. Somebody's not going to scrutinize you, and we'll get back to what scrutiny looks like. But also, full disclosure, I was born in Trinidad and I was raised here, and there's a lot of Trinidad culture.
Yeah, there is.
that is like definitely steeped within me. And so going to somebody as well, and we have to acknowledge the African and Caribbean diaspora, because going to somebody that understands the culture and it offers so much context, right? For
Yes.
how you are experiencing what it is that you are experiencing and what that is and how that makes you, or what that causes in terms of a manifestation of your symptoms, and how you cope, and what avenues there are for coping in sort of informal structures in your life, right?
Yes.
I think about the 2S LGBTQ plus community and what safe looks like for them, because it doesn't look the same as, for people who live in dominant cultures, and by dominant I mean specifically like, white people accessing care. And then the last bit that I obviously, as a social worker working in women's and children's, I feel very strongly about this issue and understand sort of this, the tightrope that is walked. But when you think about safety, and when you made the comment, Candice, around, if I am a danger to myself or my child, that's when I'll get the timely access. But that also comes with like surveillance. That also comes with the risk of losing your custody of your child to a child welfare system. And we know that for many cultures and communities, including the Black and Indigenous communities, for whom there's a disproportionate number of children in care, that's a threat. And so, yes. And so you think about, when we talk about access to resources, willingness to access resources, willingness to access safe resources, and then safe resources altogether that acknowledge the inherent flaws within the system that put people in these positions, but also how do you make sure that the strength of the family and the well-being of the family includes the parent-child relationship. And how do you fortify people in those contexts, understanding that there are extreme circumstances where, there's a really tough evaluation that has to be made about, the immediate safety of the child and what exactly it is that the parent needs, and looking towards, whatever minimal risk that looks like, and reunification as quickly and as safely as possible.
Yes, I love that you said that, safe and accessible care, because it's so true. You wouldn't go anywhere that you didn't feel safe. And it's disheartening to think that there are people that are not accessing what little is there because they do not feel safe. I feel like that's something that needs to be addressed. And for each specific area that needs to be addressed, you and I both discussed the fact that there are a lot of layers that come to this, and you just described them so well, right? So my dad is from Trinidad and Tobago, and he came here in his 20s, right?
Yeah.
But to him, he found a doctor in Toronto that was Trini, and he went to him. He gave birth to all of us, like delivered all of us. Yeah. He wouldn't go anywhere else, and anything that we ever had, he needed to see this person because he trusted this person. He understood his culture and how he felt, and knew how to have a conversation with my dad to make him feel comfortable that he's taking the best care of his children that he can. So I thank you so much for bringing up the actual, it's something that I haven't heard, safe care. So now that I've heard that, it just kind of, it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's another missing piece to these resources. It's one thing to have them, but if they're not benefiting in a way that we need, then we need to reallocate something to somewhere else to help the people that really need it.
Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to, we also talked about being a good patient.
Oh, gosh.
You've touched on the, in terms of the BIPOC community, and even in my experience, wanting to be the most polite and the most kind, which I learned from my father. You always say, hello, how are you? Goodbye. You don't give them a reason to be upset. So when pregnant, for the first time, I didn't feel comfortable complaining or asking questions or too many questions. You don't want to be that person because they're already annoyed at you because you look this way. So just kind of go with the flow. They won't harm you and everything will be well. You know, they already might be looking at you a certain way. And the fact that my husband is white and I look like this, they might be looking at us a certain way. Do you know what I mean? So all those thoughts were going through my mind. They were amplified that summer of 2020 with the death of George Floyd, and seeing all of these things come up about women of color feeling very unsafe, very mistreated. I know you can touch more on that topic in terms of birthing persons and that experience. But it was the first time it had hit me that it's very, very real that someone would look at me and I might not have the same birthing experience or safety as the next person just because of the way I look. And I think going into delivering Ada that summer was the first time I had ever been afraid of, I'm like, I'm supposed to trust these people that I'm surrounded by. I'm the only person in the room of color. But historically and percentage-wise, there could be harm to me. And this could be just in my mind. I'm not saying it's statistics, but in my mind mentally. So you can imagine if I'm already experiencing these anxieties and worries, then I'm in the delivery room experiencing these anxieties and worries. It was just, can you touch on, I know you mentioned the good patient. And as soon as you said that, I thought of how many times I've been in a doctor's office where I felt like, just be calm. Don't get angry. Then you'll be that angry person, you know?
Yeah. Okay. There's so much to say here. Where do I start? Okay. The good patient.
We have to be that strong, Black, right? We have no weaknesses, apparently.
This is the part that's difficult for me to describe in terms of my actual feelings around it, because I think to myself, oh my gosh, when people say you're not a mom, you don't actually know, and they're absolutely right. Being in the thick of it, and I'm recalling cases that have come up, and I guess a social worker, and just picking stories and hearing stories that here and there, and then consolidating all of this information. It hits me in a way that like it's all coming together. I don't know if you've seen the movie The Usual Suspects.
Oh yeah.
Right. And at the very end, my sister and I call it the Kobayashi moment, where the mug drops and, and then it all comes together and you see the full picture. And I've had more experience of Kobayashi moments in the recent past. And so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about this notion of the good patient. And then tumble down a rabbit hole for a little bit and hopefully loop back to a good patient. When we see people in hospitals, they are not at their best. They are not, they are not like best sleep the night before, tip-top mental, physical form, ready to conquer the world, full expertise. We're not seeing, like, people don't come to the hospital for these things. And even when they're in these states, they like the alteration of these kinds of states, or whatever that optimal form looks like for them, is long gone by the time they're like, maybe I need to go to the hospital. They've been, something has happened. And even, for pregnant and birthing people, where there is positive, this kind of positive anticipation that we put on this experience. And I'm not saying that that is the case for all, birthing people. But there's a bit of anticipation when you think about, the emergency department, the ICU, and then you think about labor and delivery. It's a completely different mindset that goes there, but they're not in their optimal state. We've heard about
yes,
the second stage of labor, right? Where things really kind of turn for the experience of the birthing person, the woman or the birthing person, level of pain, what your body is doing. They are not in their optimal form.
No.
So to have the expectation that people are delivering babies, maybe not in a straightforward pattern, after hours of labor, post C-section, or getting to a point of a C-section, to have the expectation that they are still an epidural, yes, please, and thank you. Oh, whenever you have time, I just need some assistance getting to the bathroom. No, I can wait. I understand that other people are, delivering babies right now. Whenever you can come by.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I've said all the above.
Right. And then you white knuckle it until then. You just.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. No, I don't want to say anything again. I just asked them, a little bit ago. Yes. There are healthcare workers that are attentive to all of these things. Don't get me wrong. And they're like, okay, I understand that was, and after deliveries, I understand that was a different version of you. And that's fine. I get it. But this concept of holding on to these things, like if I'm polite enough, they will help me more.
Yes.
They'd be interested in making sure that I'm okay because I have not complained. I have, been kind. I've not asked too much.
Yes.
And it's a really challenging thing when you are a person of color. So, because your behaviors, your disposition may be read as aggressive or angry. And we all know about this notion of the angry Black woman. And it doesn't even have to get to the point where we're angry, like legitimately, where you can say for yourself, of course I'm angry. But you don't hear that narrative with many other women from other social locations. And it's sometimes the slightest thing that puts you into that category and look out, she's aggressive. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because then it starts a whole new level of scrutiny. I wonder what she's going to be like with her baby. Oh my goodness. Here comes like the walls are up, the defenses are up, right?
Yes.
But then tumble down this rabbit hole with me, if you will. But then you get into sort of the complications, like where there are complications with delivery that disproportionately affect women of color. And I saw this statistic and I wrote it in a paper. And the person that was editing the paper for me said, are you sure you didn't forget a decimal point? And I said, no, I'm 100% sure.
Ooh.
Black women in the US it's reported that African-American women are 243% more likely, yes, that face, 243% more likely to experience incidents of morbidity or mortality in maternal care.
Over 200%?
Yes. No decimal point. 243%. And we're talking about things, and I'm going to raise some names here. Serena Williams, we all know that story incredibly well. Allison Felix, who is a US track star, phenomenal woman that was having symptoms of preeclampsia and reported to her care provider many times, like, these are the things that I'm experiencing. And they were like, you're an elite athlete, that might be just an athlete thing. And Jennifer Carol Foy, and I want to make sure to get this right. So she was a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, and she described her experiences with telling healthcare providers, like, something's wrong, that, like, there's trouble here. And those are people in positions of relative power.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I think back to stories that I've heard from family members of mine, obviously Black women who have been coached about, how do you conduct yourself in the delivery room so that you let people know something's wrong and that they believe you. And it's things like, you scream the loudest that you can. It doesn't matter. Put everything else that you want to be, that good patient, aside, because all that matters in that moment is that they believe you and that you are okay. You and your child are okay at the end of it. And so you have to part that notion. And they're coached by generations ahead of them, by friends that are familiar with how this operates in healthcare. And it is this tussle between being this notion of a good patient and wanting to let people know something's wrong, but risking getting into that category of angry Black woman or aggressive. And it's tough.
That's such a fine line. I don't even know how you would walk that fine line at all. Because in that moment as well, when you're delivering a baby, you're not thinking, well, I mean, personally, like, the capacity to add that to what's physically happening to you is, I have to be mindful of everyone around me and their reactions to me. I have to be mindful of how I'm reacting and deliver this baby at the same time, so we both end up safe. I just feel that's such a big layer to add. It's not fair. It doesn't feel fair. It's, I don't know. I don't even think saying it's not fair is adequate.
Absolutely.
You and I discussed, well, actually, I made the comment on the phone with you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, they have it so bad in the States. Like, I wonder what can, you're like, well, actually, actually bring it back now. And
yeah.
I know we have this notion of, Canada, we have our hockey and our maple syrup, and we're nice to everybody. We always say sorry. Right? It's such that, and I'm very proud that people view us that way. But I would be more proud if people viewed us as, we are that way, but we still have the same amount of flaws as everybody else. But this is how we're managing it. So you had mentioned that the possible reason someone like me would not suspect that this happens here, it just happens somewhere else, is because we don't actually collect the same amount of data or any data at all. Can you talk about that, like how you explained it to me in terms of why we might think this way, and what is it that we're doing to calculate this data, or any of it, if we have any?
So the biggest thing is the lack of collection of race-based data in Canada. And so if I were to, this is the part where I put on my, sort of historical ethics hat, and say that a lot of understandings for not collecting that data in the past has been because it puts communities at risk, or it was perceived to put communities at risk for being taken advantage of in a particular way. and even aside from that, I was raised understanding that, like when you're applying to university or college or schools or whatever, or even just, signing up for something online and they ask for your race and your gender, you don't put either of them because of the disadvantages that it may potentially bring to you. So I think that there's this like historical notion of, it puts respondents in a vulnerable position to have that information collected. The downside of that is what we are seeing is that we actually don't know those statistics in Canada. We don't know what are the morbidity and mortality outcomes for Black women or women of color in maternal care. Does that mean that it doesn't exist? Gosh, no, absolutely not. And actually, there was one study that did a comparison and looking particularly at preterm deliveries as an indicator for maternal care. And accounting for the things that are different between Canada and the US in terms of healthcare access, affordability, those kinds of things. And it turned out that it was about the same for Black women in the US and Black women in Canada when you use preterm births as an indicator.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it is easy, and I think because of all of the other structures and the clear ways in which we can see sort of racism, institutional racism in the US, it like shine a very bright light on it. I don't think those conversations happen with as much frequency in Canada. And I think that poses a bigger problem, that when we get into conversations about the urgency or the importance of this kind of thing for Black maternal or BIPOC maternal care in Canada, I think we have to start with the statistics. And this goes for many other aspects of healthcare, and not just necessarily in an acute care setting for BIPOC communities, just the collection of race-based data.
How do you feel about it being collected? Do you feel that it would benefit us or hurt us?
At this point, it has to benefit us. It has to benefit us. And understanding that there ought to be safety and protections in place in terms of aggregated data, so that it doesn't pinpoint a particular person or a particular community, but understanding those nuances, the specifics of those nuances are really important, because as we've mentioned before, the African and Caribbean diaspora, Black people are not homogenous. And so coming to understand the unique needs of communities are really important. And so it has to help us. I think there is an interest, and George Floyd in 2020 sort of turned this corner on this in a way that made it different in healthcare. Not to say that there wasn't that interest before, but there is certainly an interest now. We hear lots of stories, and the examples that I gave were from people in the US, but there are lots of stories and great articles that I've read for Black mothers in Canada that talk about their fears and anxieties, just not only with childbearing, birthing, and rearing, but just the experience of being a Black woman. And I think what we have now is a collection of stories, and race-based data will be able to help us quantify it in a way that helps us move these interests forward.
I would agree, because I always, in my mind, it's if I know better, I can do better. Yeah. If we know better, we can do better. And I agree saying that it doesn't have to pinpoint specific things to kind of not oust, but for lack of a better term, kind of shed a light somewhere we don't need, but to shed a light somewhere we do need. I think would be so beneficial. This time last year, there was a bill 176 put forward by a member of the NDP party here in Mississauga, and her name is Butilla. She brought her infant to Parliament and was like, we need a maternal mental health strategy across this country, period. The whole bill was just to say, hey, something's not working here. Could we look into it? Just check it out. You don't have to do anything, but could you just look into it? And so now that you and I are talking about, there really isn't that data.
Yeah.
When they say, can you look into it? My fear now is, what is there to look at?
You're right. You're right. But I think that the acknowledgement that has to come with that is like looking at the foundations of what does looking into it mean? And it means, what are the infrastructures we need to put in place to collect race-based data? What are the timelines that we're looking at? Let's be clear about the definitions of when we think about morbidity and mortality, and ensure that it captures things that disproportionately impacts women of color. Like we think about fibroids, or the prevalence of fibroids that Black women are more apt to be diagnosed with than, let's say, white women. And how does that impact the birthing experience? Like, what are those kinds of considerations? So we need to make sure that there are comprehensive ways and clear definitions for understanding what constitutes morbidity, and factors that lead to mortality. And not just in the physical health, but mental health as well. And knowing that the two like have such close ties to each other, but building in the infrastructure that we can collect that data and ensuring that it's done over a period of time that adequately reflects good information, as well as building in the piece at the end to say that we will continue to collect this data so that we can continue to monitor the situation and not have it be so closed off from a timelines perspective that we're not actually getting the things that we need.
Okay. Yes, I would agree. I feel like personally, I very much look into the maternal mental health world. I like to have my finger on the pulse of it, I say, but to know that I'm still in the dark about, and someone like me would say something like, oh, I'm so glad we're not in the States. It's obviously not that bad here. So that's coming from someone that knows. Yeah. So, right, like I feel like if we can look into it, just like you had said, I think it would benefit us to help us put things in place that start to change the past for sure, and to create a new way of how we look at it and have a strategy for the whole of the perinatal mental health. I wanted to ask you, now that we've talked about we've seen some of the disparities and which communities where they rank there and the different layers and the lack of resources. What can we do as a community to support each other, to create spaces where I feel safe talking to you? I feel like I'm part of this community, even though in my darkest days, can't get out of bed. I know there's someone out there that cares about how I feel. There are, just to make our community, how can we work together to make this better? What is it how do we do that?
That is a big question. A big question. And I think about a number of things. High level, social worker at heart. I think about the things that are on the ground, grassroots as well. So high level really is the advocacy work and the lobbying work for a national perinatal mental health strategy. Yes. That looks for all of the things that we talked about today. So timely access, safe access, to resources to help a diverse group of people get what it is that they need, and to feel some level of competence at this. I think the other bit too is, and this is a lot of work, there's the labor that is suggested, that's put on to communities that, you know, deserve the kind of help that they're asking for, and then putting back the labor on them to say, well, you need to do the work as well. It's tough, but
Yes.
I think forming communities, safe spaces, safe places, and not just, you know, more beyond your circle, right? Beyond your informal supports. I think about friends that I have had who are of all different ethnicities and backgrounds and races. And, you know, I think to myself, gosh, I was a social worker in the, you know, women's and children's programs. They could come to me, I could figure this out. But I think it needs to be more than just me. I think when we get into this space of, and to use a feminist term, consciousness raising, to be around people that are having the same experience as you, or have had the same or similar experiences as you, and, you know, actively trying to be engaged in groups and and this is a lot to ask, going back to the question about labor, but to engage with the groups in your community that's of you know, women and birthing people, you know, at around the same stage that you're at, with, you know, children around the same ages. That's how you build your community. And in that, it's in that consciousness raising around where we're having similar experiences, gets to the point of, and starts to tackle this thing around perhaps insight, acknowledgement, and feeling safe to say, well, how do we get to a place where we get what we need? I think too, beyond things that already are existent, I think there should be great opportunities, emphasis on should be great opportunities when we think about a national perinatal mental health strategy, and particularly for women of color, being able to create, like to have businesses, to have resources, to create spaces to say, do you know what? I've been here. I welcome you all into this space. I have a friend who, you know, had an experience with perinatal mood disorders and went on, you know, to start a business to help other people tackle the same things that she was experiencing, and to build a sense of community, and to let them know that the feelings that they are feeling, of, you know, missing the life that they had in the past, which is a very difficult thing to say, as well as coming to understand, you know what, this is, you're getting into the realm of a perinatal mood disorder, and this is something that you should reach out to help for, and we are all here to support you. I think, you know, sort of off the top of my head, those are some of the things that come to mind, and they feel sort of down the road, sort of wishing and hoping for a government strategy or a government uptake. But I think it really needs to start in safe spaces, to be able to go to at least one other person to say, this is hard. I'm having a hard time. And that level of vulnerability is a lot.
Yes, it makes a big difference when you are feeling a certain way and you find that you connect with that person and they meet you on that level. And it's just like, it's not just me. Immediately, it's not just me. I don't just feel this way. There's a whole bunch of other people that feel this way. I didn't always attend mom groups. I felt that I didn't feel comfortable going. I think at the time, I felt like I was a bad mother for feeling this way. And if I go, they'll know and they'll see me. So I have to stay home. But connecting with someone that said, I don't like leaving my house. because I don't want anyone to know I don't like being a mom. And I'm like, I hear you. I hear you. And just that one person made a world of difference. I now had my tiny little community that I could share my fears with, my worries with, my wins with. I didn't feel so alone. And time goes on and things shift, right? Babies sleep more, you get out more, you do different things. So that evolves. But from that moment of fear, having those tiny little groups within the community to make you feel less isolated is so, so crucial. And I think I love what your friend is doing, is creating these safe spaces. I hope I can do that in my own community, to say, like, I see you where you're at, and if I can help, I will. And just by doing that. But again, like you said, a lot of us that are experiencing the trauma are having to do the work to make sure this trauma doesn't happen again, which feels very exhausting, but very empowering at the same time.
Yeah.
Almost like you've got to the top of this hill, this mountain, I should say, and you're finally saying, like, no, this shouldn't happen again. I have 2 little girls at home, and when I promise them, I never, ever want them to experience this. And if they do experience it, which is completely okay, that they will put up their hand and someone will be able to say, oh, you just need to go here and you need to do this. The same way if they fell and hurt their leg, you'd go here and you would do this. That it's not something I have to look for or fight for. It just is. I think that is my hope, that one day these sorts of resources will just be there. It will be common knowledge to access. During the pandemic, a friend of mine texted me and said, my daughter's going through something right now. I don't know what to do. Can you tell me where to go? She's like, or should I just take her to Emerge? Could you imagine if someone called me and said, listen, Candice, I sprained my ankle. I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
That would be so weird. It seems so simple. I know it's not that simple, but to me, when I look at it, you can't say it's equal if you're not treating it equally. And it broke my heart to think that another mom reached out to me to ask me, who's not a doctor. I do what I can, and I definitely, I'm a huge advocate for mental health, but I felt bad that she didn't have someone in the healthcare field, a healthcare practitioner to reach out to easily access care. You have to look for it. That was very heartbreaking. So I referred her to everyone and anyone I knew. And again, that's us coming together as a community. You find your network, you find your person, and she found me, and I found this and that, and then it all came full circle. And that's what we're building. It feels very tiring, but in that moment, you help that person. I think it's really important.
You're so right. And you're so right about it being empowering. And my hope is for people like me, for whom this topic is, like, I have such great passion for it, even though I am not a mother, I have not had these experiences. My hope is that there are more allies like me out there to help carry this load and to see it through to fruition. Because we see ourselves in the community. There's lots to talk about in terms of reproductive justice that, that's another topic for another day, but really understanding that my humanity is wrapped up in yours, and we are in this together as a community. And my desire to help and support people who are having these experiences in whatever way that I can, I think is the important part for me.
Yes, I think your work is incredible. I'm so happy that I found you and we connected. I feel like my community just grew a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? I really appreciate you and all the work that you do. just, I know it kind of goes back, but I want to connect it to something that we're hosting in our community. Yes. And you know about it because you're part of the Canadian Perinatal Mental Health Collaborative. But we spoke about there being a spectrum, and we've heard Flora's story. Flora sadly took her own life just 3 months ago. She struggled with postpartum psychosis, and that affects 1 to 2 in 1,000 women. And the resources are very rare, I've been told. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but for 1 and 2 out of 1,000, to me, that doesn't sound rare. It sounds like it happens probably way too often. And to think that the follow-up resources aren't there. She left behind her baby, Amber, and her sister is adopting her, and they're living in the UK. But her story really hit me because I didn't experience postpartum psychosis, but reading about Flora's story, I felt a little piece of that along the way. I felt like, yeah, that could be me. That could be anybody. And it got to the point where it went untreated and undiagnosed. And she passed away the day before her sister finally got her in to see someone. She was a day away. It seems just so unfair. That's so heartbreaking. It's not fast enough. The access is not fast enough. And I think Flora would still be here if she had access to timely care and safe care. And when I heard about postpartum psychosis, I've heard about it, but I never experienced that level. Could you kind of, if you can, like, tell us more about postpartum psychosis and why maybe the resources are so limited? Is that a big question?
It is a big question. So you're right. Postpartum psychosis gets to sort of the far end of the spectrum. And for, anybody for whom this topic is really close, a little bit close or close enough, this may be, quite challenging to hear. But postpartum psychosis can lead to things like suicide and infanticide. So if you remember at the beginning, when we talked about baby blues, postpartum depression, and then we get into like anxiety disorders, and I talked about hypomania and mania. And sometimes it sometimes it manifests as like a hyper focus on personal safety or the child's safety, but it becomes so far gone at that point, so far gone that I believe it starts to get into this place of feeling that everything would be better off without me. It is incredibly tragic from what I understand, the statistics that you described, I've seen as well. It's framed in that way for a particular reason, but I think, that for anybody experiencing that, to get to the point where they are successful in sort of ending their life, I think that tells us what the problem is and why there's a concern around access. And, reflecting on all of the things that we talked about, the timely access, and just the day before, because it's, there's this thinking about if she could have just held out for one more day. And I don't think mental health works that way. I don't think postpartum psychosis works that day, that I can white knuckle it for one more day. It is I think it gets to the point of, complete distress, despair, and then being resolute about that this is the way to fix it. I'm not familiar with the world of reasons as to why that is. If somebody says, I can get to the treatment, but I don't think that will help. Or, oh my goodness, if I get to treatment, what does that mean for my family? I cannot abandon my baby. Like, I'm not sure. I don't know truthfully, sort of, what are the factors or the reasons or some of the, or if we can even unpack some of those things that bring somebody to that point. But it's incredibly tragic, incredibly tragic.
Yes. I'm not sure if this sounds harsh to say, but I feel like maybe it doesn't to me anyway, but I feel like our system failed Flora and her whole family. And what gives me hope in hearing that story is that we're not going to fail the next Flora. We're going to do our very best to show up in any way that we can for all of the Floras across this country, for anyone on this spectrum. I think if mental health or maternal mental health has touched you in any way, it feels like a responsibility, or not even a responsibility, but like that's something you say yes to. Like, I don't want to feel this way. When I do feel this way, and if I did get help or access to help, I want to help the next person coming through the door behind me. I want to hold the door open for them, so it's easier for them. And I know you've heard about the walk that we're having for Flora, and it is across Canada. I think to date, I haven't looked this morning, but yesterday, I think we've raised $23,000 in just the last few weeks. And in Barrie, I'll be leading the Barrie team here on May 4th. Yeah, you should come.
I should.
Yeah, and the support, like I love this community. I don't know, I feel at home, so at home here. I reached out to one person and they reached out to 10. Those 10 reached out to, and it was just this massive, of course we're going to help you. Of course we're going to get loud that day. And of course we're going to walk and support you. Because even if it didn't happen to me, I know someone that it's happened to, or it's happened to me, and they just want to be there that day to support. And I think people aren't coming because they knew Flora. They're coming because they feel for Flora, her family, and they want to make sure that we do better, and the system, and we hold the institutions accountable to do better. So the walk is happening in Barrie, May 4th, downtown, from 11:30 to 1. I don't know if you can come. It's in the middle.
I'm going to do my very best to make it.
It is in the middle of the day. And I know all my entrepreneurial friends are like, it's in the middle of the work week, but everyone has reached out in a little way. They're like, how can I help? I will share it, and I will do anything I can. And I know that at UPlift, on UPliftBlack.org, they have a list of resources that are there for expecting parents and parents to access for mental health help in our community specifically. And I think it's phenomenal what they're doing, because they not only are delivering that resource, but remembering that they have to add these layers of help to the specific people that require specific needs, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So if anybody wants to check out that list, they can at upliftblack.org, and to donate or sponsor or just walk with us. I'm so excited to just have this purpose. You can walk from A to B for absolutely no reason, or you can walk from A to B with strong purpose. And I think that's what we're going to do on May 4th. And I'll put a link in this so people can access or read Flora's story and reach out in any way. I have to ask, can we add anything to this epic discussion? I'm so glad we touched on so many really important points, and I think we elaborated into them to really explain them and let people understand them. I think you did such an incredible job at helping us understand what's happening in our system, because you work and live and breathe in the system. So you don't have any children, but you see us all the time. You know our stories, you know our struggle, and the fact that you're working in this field to help us. I can't thank you enough for all that you do.
I am so humbled by the experiences of mom and parents. So humbled. It is not lost on me how incredibly rewarding, challenging, demanding it all is. And the people who have moved me the most in my life, beyond, some of my family members, I would say, are women and birthing people that I have encountered along the way. And some of their names and their faces stick with me. I'm not going to mention them here, but it's incredibly, incredibly humbling. I am honored to have been called to participate in this work more generally, and to be able to speak to it, because I definitely have a passion for Black maternal care.
Yes, and that it exudes from you, for sure.
Thank you.
Is extraordinary. So thank you so much. And I feel like we need to do like a part 2, like a whole series of things, because we went down so many rabbit holes.
Oh, we totally did. And we haven't, there's a whole other topic altogether that I'm starting to wade into on reproductive justice. And that's just, that's a whole other avenue on its own.
Well, you know what? We can be back. We can have a part 2 anytime. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. If you want to say where people can connect with you, where can people find you if they have follow-up questions or they're interested in your studies?
Yeah, for sure. You are more than welcome to connect with me on Instagram. I believe I will be tagged in some particular way, so you could catch me there. And happy to connect in those ways. So thank you.
Yes. So don't worry, we will tag and we'll put all of the links of our discussions into the notes. So if you need to ask questions, you can connect with us, or you can connect with UPlift Black right here in Barrie anytime. And thank you again so much for doing this. I learned so much. I could talk forever with you. You know that.
Yes.
Until we meet again, thank you so much. And thank everyone for listening.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And I hope people are able to get something meaningful out of this.